For me, growing up in Central Florida in the 70s and the 80s, the NFL was just not that big of a deal. The Bucks were terrible. The Dolphins were all the way down in Miami. College football was king, and thus, I've never been much of an NFL guy. But I do appreciate the Super Bowl, and I wanted to do some kind of preview, so I called in my resident NFL expert, radio veteran and football podcaster Todd Wright is my guest on Media Credentials.
I demand satisfaction.
My name is Whit Watson, and this is Media Credentials. I'm a sports announcer who's worked a lot of places. This podcast will peel back the layers of sports media and show you how the sausage gets made. Through interviews with industry pros and my own experience, you'll understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and who's responsible for it. Your media credentials have been approved. Todd Wright is one of my oldest friends in the business. You might remember him from All Night with Todd Wright, the national ESPN radio show that he started in 1996. He had another national show on Sporting News Radio and made frequent appearances on local radio in Tampa, where he lives. We worked together on TV for many years at the old Sun Sports. He was a panelist on our talk shows. And since semi-retiring from radio, he created the Todd Wright Tour, a series of wildly successful amateur golf events in the Tampa Bay area. Todd and I play a lot of golf together. He also hosts a couple of podcasts, including one dedicated to fantasy football. Basically, when I have NFL questions, Todd is my guy. So here is our semi-serious Super Bowl preview. Half football, half silly prop bets, and where you might sprinkle some cash this weekend. And yes, we talk about Taylor Swift. Todd, we've done countless hours of television together, but this is a first for us, sharing a podcast. Thanks a lot for coming on. How are you doing?
I miss doing hours of television with you, Whit. It was a lot of fun for the years that we did it. Perhaps we can do it again in the future. Who knows what this business holds for talented guys like you and guys like me. We both have enthusiasm, a lot of experience. We've met a lot of really good people. So who knows? But for now and today, I think this is great.
I am a rookie podcaster. This is about my 35th or 36th episode. You are the wily veteran in this combination. How many podcasts do you host, and how long have you been doing it?
I am on 8 years of it. The idea was brought forth to me when I stepped away from doing full-time radio, that it was a way for me to stay connected with people who wanted to hear me, and I really shrugged it off. And there was an entity in the Tampa Bay area that was well-respected, had their stuff together, and I would talk to them on a casual basis. And they just said they would be interested if I would be interested. Some time went by, and then it came to my attention that these guys that covered professional football, primarily the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they had a really good online audience, and they had the respect of the Buccaneer ownership group. They basically said to me, "We hate fantasy football. Can you take care of this? We don't want to answer these questions. We're not equipped to answer these questions. This would be a great spot for you to jump in." And I jumped in. And I've since done 8 seasons of the Todd Wright Fantasy Football Podcast via JoeBucksFan.com, where they distribute and platform it, various other places, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. And that led to Lightning Playoff Podcast. That led to me doing the Todd Wright Toddcast, which is a non-fantasy podcast that runs whenever I want to do it, once a week, twice a week, skip a week, whatever. I just posted episode 282 of the Todd Wright Toddcast. In the first week, late in the second week of February, there were 2 that first week after the AFC NFC Championship games. And then I just launched with the Todd Wright Survivor Football Podcast last year, because more and more people who love pro football have been playing Survivor football And there's a contest in Vegas that this past year was worth over $9 million in a one and done pick a winner each week. You can only pick a team once. And I do a Survivor podcast because I play in Survivor leagues. And next year that it's already been renewed for year 2 with the sponsor, and we'll do even more episodes. So I've probably done, let's see, if there's roughly 50 episodes in the fantasy football podcast times 8, add the 282 Toddcast, add the Lightning pod. Yeah, I'm up there. I'm approaching 1,000 podcasts, just giving you the shortest answer I can.
Where do you get your info for the fantasy football podcast, and how much time are you putting into each one? Because I can tell you doing this, and I'm a one-man band. I'm producing it. I'm publicizing it. I'm doing the edits. Obviously, you've got some production help, but where do you get your info and how much time does it take?
I've been playing fantasy football for a long time, and I have my own personal leagues. And then through the podcast, we started podcast leagues as well. And sometimes if someone can't make the draft in the personal league, which we call the foundation, I ask them, well, do you have a conflict on this date? That's the date of the podcast league draft. And we have so many winners now in the podcast league that has spun off. We will have a league of champions next year. Only people who have actually won the podcast league will play in a separate league, all former champions. So I get my info, Whit, from just being a football fan, from years of playing fantasy football, from playing in my own leagues and commissioning my own leagues, enjoying the National Football League, and watching various games. I don't watch a lot of football talk. That's something, Whit, that changed when I stepped away from, and you knew me very well at the time because I was working with you on television. When I stepped away from full-time radio duty, people said, well, what's the biggest difference? I said, now I get to watch what I want to watch, and I don't have to watch what I don't want to watch. Mm-hmm. So I don't watch a lot of talk programming in sports. I don't listen to a lot of talk programming in sports. I watch games. I draw my own conclusions. And as anyone who knows who plays fantasy football, you have opinions on who's doing what, how to assemble a draft board, who to pick up on waivers, and it is just a lot of fun. So I just gather it by being a fan, knowing where the games are, knowing how to get the information I need off the websites that manage our fantasy football leagues, and we go from there.
How many playoff games and Super Bowls have you attended in person?
36.
Total.
How
many Super Bowls?
8. I don't like to count Super Bowl 34, but my friends tell me I should because I covered, that was Rams-Titans. The big ice storm hit Atlanta back in the Georgia Dome days and shut the city down for a few days. And then, the game was okay, but it's remembered for the long pass Warner to Isaac Bruce, 75, 80 yards, and then the Titans come back. The throw to Dyson, I believe, and Mike Jones tackles him 1 yard short, and the game's over, 23-16. That was supposedly the start to the greatest show on turf, and they never won another one. Instead, Tom Brady got in their way 2 years later, and it was the start to something special for Brady, Belichick, and the Patriots. I don't count that one, Whit. You can probably respect this, because I sat in a room in the Georgia Dome, and my own eyes didn't see a single play. We had televisions, we had food, I was around other media, but I didn't have view of the field. So that one sort of counts because I worked it. Everything else I'm telling you about does. 7 other Super Bowls, 28 other postseason games, whether they were the first round, the wild card round, the divisional round, or conference championships, where I actually had a seat in the stadium, whether it was a ticket or a credential, where my own eyes could watch whatever I wanted, and I wasn't subjected to just the television feed.
Does attending the Super Bowl and watching it with your own eyes in a seat, as opposed to being in the media room, live up to the hype? Because on television, it's a spectacle. What is it like in the stands?
It's different. I guess my best experience that I can share with you was at Super Bowl 38, where I was very fortunate to have very good tickets. I had a run with Super Bowl 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. A PR firm that worked with the NFL on the NFL experience liked me, and I helped them with some projects at various Super Bowls, or at times other than during the Super Bowl itself. And a representative of that PR firm couldn't move the week of Super Bowl 35 in Tampa 2 tickets for Ravens and Giants. And I said, what do you want for them? And he said, Todd, I can only sell them at face value. Don't you have a credential? I said, well, I do, but I don't know if my credential allows me to watch the game. This was coming off Super Bowl 34. And I said, I'll buy them. And I took my longtime friend, also in the radio business, who I had known quite some time. And we went to the Super Bowl that day. And then immediately after the game, I went downstairs and I did interviews, and I did my show that night on national radio, and went from there. And then I had those tickets, Whit, from that person for 5 straight years, including Super Bowl 38, where I actually saw the wardrobe malfunction happen. And I realized something was wrong when that happened, how quickly the lights went down, the show stopped. There was just this awkward silence in the stadium. And I openly said to people sitting around me, I think Justin Timberlake just pulled Janet Jackson's top off. And they said, huh? What are you talking about? And sure enough, that became the story, not the Vinatieri kick to win it for the second year out of 3 for the Patriots. Then I made the mistake, Whit, when the Super Bowl went to Detroit for Super Bowl 40. It was as much that it was Detroit as it was Steelers-Seahawks, and the matchup did nothing for me. And I said to my contact, you know what? I'm good. Offer them to somebody else. I never had them offered to me again. I fell out of the rotation. I should have never done it. I don't know how long it would have gone, Whit, but I made the mistake of saying no to Super Bowl tickets, and I've since only been to one more, and that was Super Bowl 44, Colts Saints, which I worked for another national radio network where I did shows all week from a convention center in Fort Lauderdale Beach, because that was sort of a South Florida Super Bowl, not a Miami Super Bowl.
I probably should have asked this question at the top. Are we allowed to say Super Bowl in a podcast?
Sure.
Are you
I do it all the time. So they're going to come after anybody, Whit. They're going to come after me.
Okay. What about putting it in the title of a podcast? Can you do that?
I've done that.
You've done that.
I've done that. Whit, dare I say this, and we obviously talk a lot of golf, and you've played in some of my Todd Wright Tour golf tournaments. We haven't brought them up yet, but I've been hosting golf tournaments now for nearly 10 years. I'm hosting my 45th golf tournament on Super Bowl Saturday, as it were. We do Super Bowl squares and give away grand prizes, and it's a fun golf tournament. And the tournament that I've been doing in April is the Saturday before the Masters week. And I brand myself as a Masters-inspired tournament. I don't call it that, but I tell my players, we are a Masters-inspired tournament. Please wear appropriate clothes. Please wear appropriate colors. My logo is inspired by the Masters. And I get asked by people saying, well, what if someone from Augusta National Golf Club sent you a cease and desist? And I said, then I know I've made it. I will frame it. I will let everybody know that the Augusta National Golf Club cares about the Todd Wright Tour. And I will be flattered to alter whatever I need to alter based on them paying attention to me. So it would be the same thing for the NFL if they said, you know, Todd, you can't use the term Super Bowl in your podcast. I'm sorry. And I would be like, wow, thank you for listening. Can you put that in writing, please?
I'm adopting that attitude. If I get the cease and desist, I'll let you know. You and I can autograph it, and then we'll frame it.
Yep.
All right, let's actually get to the game that's coming up this week. The Super Bowl, not the big game, but the Super Bowl. Let's start unit by unit. San Francisco's offense versus Kansas City's defense. Go.
I'll take it from the Kansas City defensive side of things first, because if you remember, one of the things that's changed even through Kansas City having this run of 6 consecutive appearances in the AFC title game. They're 4-2 in those games. They've hosted 5 of them. This is the first year they had to play one on the road. They've altered some things. One of the changes they made was overhauling their offensive line after Patrick Mahomes was beaten up by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they lost Super Bowl 55. And also in there, they brought in Steve Spagnuolo to be the defensive coordinator because they knew they needed to be better on defense. Because with this just in, it's all about offense these days in the NFL. We are in the 5th straight Super Bowl where both coaches have an offensive background and either call plays or in some form work with the quarterback. The days of a head coach with a defensive background winning Super Bowls seems to be on hiatus. Bill Belichick can't get a job. Mike Vrabel can't get a job. Pete Carroll just lost his job. So 5 straight Super Bowls, people can figure them out for themselves. The same coaching matchup this year as we had 5 Super Bowls ago in 54. These are offensive guys. So it helps if you have a defensive guy who can work against that. And Spagnuolo is that. Snead is an excellent defensive back. He's one of the best one-on-one DBs in the National Football League, sort of below the level of the big stars, but boy, is he good. I'd take him over Bland on the Cowboys, who had 6 pick sixes 100 times out of 100. They have Jones in the middle. They're very good in their assignments. And you saw what they were able to do against Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. And the task is large against a 49er offense. And there's your head coach, and Kyle Shanahan, who obviously has started this tree of offensive-minded head coaches throughout the National Football League, or coordinators, and a Mr. Irrelevant in Brock Purdy, who runs that offense extremely well, an Iron Man for a running back who's a 3-down back in Christian McCaffrey, a very talented tight end in George Kittle, and 2 quality wide receivers in Brandon Ayuk, who very quietly averaged more yards per catch than anyone in the NFL this year, and Deebo Samuel, who's one of the most unique offensive skill position weapons in the National Football League.
So now let's flip it and go to the Chiefs' offense against San Francisco's defense.
San Francisco's defense, coordinated by Coach Wilkes, who did quite a job. When you think how Carolina bottomed out this past year, Wilkes basically was 500 with the Carolina Panthers last year as an interim head coach when they blew out Matt Rule. He did a good job with that unit. He knows how to run a defense as well. I'd take Spagnuolo over Wilkes, but it's close. What the Niners did and have done to many opponents, they didn't do it head-to-head to Baltimore at the end of the season when Purdy had 4 interceptions and the Niners just played one of their worst games late in the regular season against Baltimore. But defensively, they can get after you on both edges. With Bosa trading for Chase Young, capable linebacker play. They're strong in the secondary. I don't think they have a player as good as Snead in the secondary. Some concerns, in the NFC title game, the Lions lit them up. Just lit them up. Seemed to do whatever they wanted to do in the first half. But credit, adjustments were made. Some mistakes were made by the Lions. The Niners took advantage of those mistakes. But the Niners also shored some things up. And the Niners defensively will be very aware that if you're going to blitz Patrick Mahomes, he's going to eat you alive. He's not a quarterback you can do that to. You're going to have to play coverage. You're going to have to get after him with 4 rushers, maybe a 5th here or there. But if you blitz him, he's going to find the flaw in your defense. And Mahomes, obviously, when we talk about the Chiefs, you got a Hall of Fame coach with an offensive background and play caller in Reed. You got a Hall of Fame quarterback, not even yet in the prime of his career in Mahomes, and a Hall of Fame tight end in Kelsey. Pacheco runs hard. Rashee Rice has come on very strong the last month plus of the regular season and into the playoffs. Is maybe the first dependable wide receiver the Chiefs have had since they traded Tyreek Hill. I look at that and the Chiefs did only score 17 against the Ravens. That just shows you how good the Chiefs defense was and how Lamar Jackson just doesn't have it in the playoffs. He's 2-4 in the postseason. Dak Prescott 2-5 in the postseason. Some quarterbacks have it in the playoffs. Some quarterbacks do not. Obviously, we know Patrick Mahomes has it.
Brock Purdy's story has been well disseminated, but I read an article, I believe in The Athletic, that offered some more details about him being drafted. He's known as Mr. Irrelevant, as you said, the last player drafted. And we mean the last player drafted. He was at the end of the compensatory picks, at the end of the draft. But the Niners were actually worried that somebody else would sign him as a free agent. He was not a total unknown. Number of teams had him on the board. The Niners had him as a fourth-round pick, but there he was at the end of the draft. And at that position, at that draft position, the conventional wisdom is you take the best player available. They didn't necessarily need a quarterback. They had traded 3 first-round picks to Miami to move up to take Trey Lance. They already had Jimmy Garoppolo, but Shanahan wanted him and didn't want someone else to get him, so he takes him. And there was a great quote from Shanahan where he walked into management offices and told the York family, I think the third-string quarterback is the best quarterback we have. Now, that being said, who is more important to his team on Sunday, Purdy or Mahomes?
It's Mahomes. Everything you say about Purdy, and some of it I wasn't even familiar with, they're just different stories. With Mahomes, it's more, Bears fans know where this is going. In the year the Bears traded up to get Trubisky, the Chiefs got Mahomes. Right. And that it's just sitting there as the Bears are back on the clock at number 1 and likely to take a quarterback and then see what they can get for Justin Fields. But, you know, with we talk about the quarterbacks that are successful in the National Football League, and some even drop off the scene and come back. I mean, the Baker Mayfield story is so good. He was a number 1 overall pick in the draft. Quarterbacks who are successful in the NFL normally are picked in the first round. Many are failures because they are overvalued because the position means so much. So when you get, look, 2 Cowboys, Romo was undrafted, but they wanted him. They thought there was something there, and they were right. Then along comes Dak Prescott, which almost didn't happen, Whit. I think you know this. The Cowboys wanted Paxton Lynch, who was a hot prospect, and Denver moved past Dallas to get him. And then Dallas was like, well, we need somebody. Well, let's take Dak Prescott. And it worked out. And then you get to a Brock Purdy. I mean, the NFC Championship was a number 1 overall pick who had played in the Super Bowl in Jared Goff against a Mr. Irrelevant. These stories don't happen very much. And it's a credit to Shanahan that he saw something in Purdy and that Purdy has developed, has listened, has been able to run the Shanahan offense. But you and I both know, if you don't have McCaffrey there, that deal, as much as Carolina's getting destroyed for not selecting C.J. Stroud and giving up all those picks to the Bears to draft Bryce Young, they got so little in return for Christian McCaffrey. I never understood it when they did it. And McCaffrey has been healthy. He's been an Iron Man. Honestly, I think that's the thing Steve Spagnuolo is going to want to take away, to force Purdy to throw, to at least make it predictable. You and I have heard this over the years. You've covered so much more high school football than me. We've both covered college football. You've covered more college football than me. What do defensive coaches say? If we can just make them predictable, we've got a chance. If we know if they're going to run or pass, we got a chance. So I think that's a real key to this game.
The tight end matchup in this game, Travis Kelce and George Kittle. Which one is more likely to get on an airplane with Taylor Swift after the game?
Yeah, if it's Kittle, then
that's
really
a story.
The tabloids are going to run with it.
That's a story.
I will put myself out there in saying I have sort of no opinion on all this. There are some that are so anti Taylor Swift's presence and this story, and then there are those, Whit, I'm sure you know, females and their daughters who basically treated Taylor Swift's last tour the way you and I would treat back-to-back rounds where we travel via private plane and we play Augusta National on Saturday and Pebble Beach on Sunday. And I got to respect that's what it means to to them, to these mothers and daughters. And I know
fathers and daughters. I mean, you wouldn't believe that when she came to Tampa, Taylor Swift came to Tampa, you couldn't get a hotel room within an hour of Tampa.
No, I should have rented out my place. I'm a mile away from the stadium. I should have Airbnb'd it and gone on vacation and made a lot of money. A colleague of mine who works for Action Network went with his wife and daughter, and I just said to him on the golf course a week later, tell me what I need to know. He said, it was basically a 3-hour Super Bowl halftime show. And I said, good enough.
Yeah.
So I don't really have an opinion on it, because it doesn't impact me. But Travis Kelce, like I said, the Chiefs with this run, Hall of Fame coach, Hall of Fame quarterback, Hall of Fame tight end. Kittle at times in the past few years, mostly because of injury, has not been one of the top tight ends in the National Football League. But as we have pushed here and the Niners have gotten back into the Super Bowl, I would imagine, Whit, if they win it, Kittle will have a game. I'm not saying he's MVP, but I don't know if there's a scenario where the Niners win this Super Bowl and Kittle's not a factor. But let's also introduce the fact that Kittle does more than just run passing routes. He does do things from a blocking standpoint. A lot of tight ends, as you and I know, they just split out. They're X's, they're Y's, they're Z. They take direct snaps. They're doing other things. Kittle is a very complete player.
We're going to get to some of the prop bets in a little bit, and I mentioned that because right now, Taylor Swift is at plus 550 to appear on stage at halftime with Usher at the game. Just throwing that out there. So file that for a second.
Right.
Give me some players on both sides that don't get a lot of attention, but could be important.
At the risk of insulting the intelligence of your listeners and saying, of course I know this guy. And we've mentioned with most of the key names. Defensively, I've mentioned Jones and Snead for Kansas City. Defensively, I've mentioned Bosa and Warner for San Francisco. Offensively, if McCaffrey isn't a factor, if Spagnuolo can somehow minimize McCaffrey's impact, not take him out of the game, but I mean, pretty much every game this year, Whit, McCaffrey scores a touchdown and his tandem offense, combined rushing and pass and receiving yards, is over 100. Let's say he doesn't score a touchdown and his combined rushing and passing yards is 50. I think that's a big dip for San Francisco. I think that puts a lot on Brock Purdy and a Brandon Ayuk and a Deebo Samuel. Now, I've seen this before a couple years ago. Deebo Samuel can do things on that field. I'd say the only player who can do more things where you're like, what just happened than Deebo Samuel is Patrick Mahomes. So yeah, even on an MVP type bet, where in most of these games, the quarterback wins most valuable player, there is a path for a Deebo Samuel to do 3 or 4 things, or maybe just 2 or 3 things, and you're like, whoa. And he's the reason the Niners win the game. So there's some standouts to me. I think it's too early for Rashee Rice to jump off the page, but I think Rashee Rice plays a role in this. And just, you were asking about the fantasy podcast. A friend of mine and I playing golf from The Athletic, we were joking about how overdrafted Rashee Rice is going to be in fantasy leagues next year.
Right.
Because of what people have seen this year.
My favorite topic when it comes to Super Bowls, the prop bets. And let's start at the beginning, the coin toss. The team that wins the coin toss is 25-32 all time. It's a losing record if you win the toss. The toss has been tails in 7 of the last 10 Super Bowls. Last season, the Chiefs became the first team to win the coin toss and win the game in 10 years. The 2013 Seahawks, it snapped actually an 8-year streak. Do you care? First of all, do you do prop bets during the game?
I do. One of the things, I've known Jay Cornegay for a long time. We don't speak often. He's much busier these days than he ever was. He is currently he's the man behind everything at the Superbook at the Westgate in Las Vegas. And Jay's phenomenal. I have been a guest at his hotel and his Super Bowl parties multiple times. We have done, when I was doing national radio we did an annual segment after the much anticipated release of the prop bets, which he released this year, the first Thursday before the Super Bowl, not the Thursday immediately before, but like 10 days out, they released all their proposition bets. And he even told Patrick Everson, who's a big fan of my podcast and a big supporter, they did a little segment, and Patrick asked Jay about the handle, and Jay admitted $2 of every $3 he will see wagered on the Super Bowl at the Superbook is on a prop bet. Really? It's not on the spread. It's not on who wins. It's not on the total. People see props and they're fun to play. What Jay said in a recent interview was they play a big bet on something to win or a total, but then they play like 5 to 8 smaller bets that are fun for them.
Sure.
On who scores first touchdown. Will this guy have a sack? Will there be a special teams or defensive touchdown? The props have exploded as a wagering market over the years, and Jay was on the front end of that at the Superbook.
It's a great way if you're having a gathering and you've got people that are not huge football fans. It's a great way to keep everybody interested in the game. You do the squares, you do the prop bets, and people that aren't big football fans are watching to see if their bet hits. National anthem annually is one of those prop bets. This year it's Reba McEntire. Length in seconds. The over-under is 90.5. It's a minute and a half second. What do you think?
No opinion on Reba, but I'll counter to give you some material.
Sure.
First, as it relates to, I'm very curious why the national anthem has become where the NFL clicks the country music fan quota box. There hasn't been a country music performer headlining or part headlining the halftime show since the Bucs beat the Raiders in Super Bowl 37, and that was Shania Twain, and she had kind of crossed over to mainstream. So it's like the NFL. Here's what I'm told, Whit, not by the league, but by someone else. The league thinks country music in the halftime show won't appeal globally. So that's why I'm told country music can't headline the halftime show. But to do the United States national, to do the national anthem is apparently different. Second, last year, Eric Church did the anthem. Rascal Flatts famously told a story on a Bobby Bones show once about how they basically had to fire Rascal Flatts from their tour because they couldn't get Eric Church off stage. And at some venues, like Madison Square Garden, if you go long, you're charged by the minute. And it's a big charge because of the staffing. So they warned Eric Church, and Eric Church just kept going. You know, he plays off the crowd. So I told a friend of mine, I said, for what it's worth, Eric Church is going to milk this anthem for all he can get because he doesn't have a clock. And sure enough, my friend hit the over with that. And I'll give you one more on squares because I like the squares. I offer them at my golf tournament. I play them every year. I even do it sometimes for some other football games. Whit, putting you on the spot. What square is the worst square to have for a football game? Which one? Which numerical combination?
So I need two numbers here?
Yes. So say, you know, I'm not saying it's obviously not Chiefs 7, Niners 3, but give me the square, Chiefs blank, Niners blank, that is statistically the worst odds to win in a square contest.
And for those who are not familiar, it's a game where 0 through 9, and you pick what you think the last number of the final score is going to be for each team.
Or first quarter score, halftime.
Or first quarter or halftime, right.
And end of game, yeah.
You can do 3 or 4 different versions of it. All right. I'm just thinking here about what are the hardest scores to achieve in football. I would think that 5 would be one of them. And I would think that, well, you can get to 28 pretty easily. I'll say 5 and 6.
All right. The worst square to have is 2 and 2. So I call that the woolery because for people old enough to remember the Love Connection.
Wow, you are aging us right now.
We remember Chuck Woolery throwing to break saying we'll be back in 2-2. So even in my squares for this Super Bowl, the envelope with the square of KC2 and SF2 has quotes the Woolery on it. And it's actually got an automatic prize in the envelope because we're not going to get a 42-42 game at the end of the third quarter. So that's the worst square to have.
First song by Usher at halftime. Right now, the leader in the clubhouse is at plus 200. I can't imagine what else it would be.
He does this song basically, Oh My God or OMG.
Right.
And that seems to be getting some buzz. The one thing I did hear from someone who knows someone, and we're really stretching here, but this is all in good fun. For the cameos, there's been recent movement in Vegas down on the odds for one particular big name. And I'm told that movement may be significant because of who runs Apple Music, which runs the Super Bowl halftime show. If you want to sprinkle a little lunch money on Alicia Keys making a cameo in the halftime show,
I saw her
might
name.
Pay off.
Okay. There's a whole bunch of artists that are listed as potentially making a cameo with Usher. And as I mentioned, Taylor Swift is one of them. Have you followed the story? There are people out there with way too much time on their hands, Todd, who have figured out that logistically she could attend the game despite the fact that she's playing a concert in Japan the day before and playing a concert in Australia the day after. But because of the time differences, someone has figured out she could actually make it. Do you think she does?
I think she does.
I do too. Yeah. I think she's going to be there.
I absolutely do. It brings back memories when I was much younger and I cared about doing as many things on a weekend as I possibly could with. Back in, I think this was 2005, I wanted to go to a U2 concert in Vancouver, British Columbia. Don't ask me why. And it was going to be it was on a Friday. Was it on a Friday night? It was on a Friday night. And I had a friend in Seattle. So I flew to Seattle on Friday. Friend picked me up at the airport. We drove from Seattle to Vancouver, went to the U2 show that night. Then I was like, okay, what else can I do on this trip? And in its quickest form, she drops me at the Vancouver airport the next day. I connect through Seattle on the plane. She drives back. I actually had to fly through Seattle to get a flight to Sacramento because the NBA playoffs were starting the next day and the Kings were hosting the Supersonics in the late game that Saturday night. I went to the late game, literally, got off the plane, cabbed to the then Arco Arena, guested the Maloofs, left the game like 5 minutes early, back to the airport, get on a red-eye flight through Houston. The only other people sitting in first class, the head referee from the game and Mike Tirico, who broadcast the game. That's who I sat in first class with leaving Sacramento, with both of them saying, what are you doing here? We all split and go our separate ways in Houston. I then fly to Baltimore, get off that plane, go to the noon game. The Washington Wizards were hosting, I believe, the Chicago Bulls in the first NBA game in the district. And I had actually pulled off the late NBA playoff game on Saturday night and the early playoff game on Sunday on two different coasts, in addition to a U2 concert, threw in a couple of baseball games, Orioles and Nationals, and was on the air on Monday back in Florida. So, Taylor, it can be done. I didn't leave North America, but if I can do it, so can you.
In the words of Kevin Garnett, anything is possible. All right, last prop question, I promise.
Well, okay, well, wait. Can I turn the tables on this because
Sure.
You're so good at this, and based on sort of what you want to get out of this podcast, let's break it down this way. What in Whit Watson's travel history to cover or attend events, what's your craziest travel story? Like mine was just there with U2 in Vancouver, the NBA on both coasts in one weekend. What's yours from your history in this business?
I would have to go back and think about it. And I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to save that for the closer
Okay.
And I will tell that story after we stop recording. I will use that as my closer because there were a couple that involved getting from like Jacksonville, Florida to Stamford, Connecticut in one night,
I'm sure.
which is impossible.
Yeah.
But I'd have to go back and think about it. But that's a great closing topic. So
anyone who's done this as long as you and as long as me, we've had something like that. And we either made it or we didn't make it.
Didn't. It's gonna be like a Corn Ferry Tour event in Evansville, Indiana. It's gonna be something like that, where there's no major airport anywhere near it. So, all right, I'll pin that and come back to it.
Got it.
Last prop question. Color of Gatorade being dumped on the winning head coach. Okay. Since 2001, the most common color has been orange 5 times. The betting favorite at plus 260 is red/pink, which I think are 2 different colors, but they're listed together. Interestingly, water, dead last. I guess no one puts water in the Gatorade coolers anymore. Your thoughts?
I still remember off one of his national championships, Nick Saban got doused with a color he hated.
Right.
And the color of the shirt he was wearing, and he ended up putting on this like leather jacket for the trophy ceremony. You could see he was visibly upset.
Right.
These guys aren't going to do that to Coach Reed. They know Coach Reed is a good sport on things. So I would imagine it would be something of the lemon lime or lighter colored variety. Although Reed always seems to wear that red jacket looking like Clifford the Big Red Dog on the sideline.
So the red wouldn't bother him. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So something like that. I don't have an educated opinion on that one, but it is fascinating that this is something that people can bet on.
People can bet on this. You can put money on the color of Gatorade. I'd like to see the NFL adopt what the Cheez-It Bowl here in Orlando did this year, which was fill a cooler full of Cheez-Its and dump that on the head coach. That was actually kind of fun. I thought that was pretty
cool. The Pop-Tarts Bowl did a great job also.
Pop-Tarts was awesome. So good.
They really did. I mean, we are in an era where the sponsors of these games mean nothing to most people. And in Orlando, the sponsors actually were memorable for Cheez-It and Pop-Tarts. And that's to the credit of everyone involved with those games.
Florida Citrus Sports, Sam Gardner, their senior director of marketing, he's been on the podcast. That was brilliant, and it's still being talked about. All right, wrap this up with a serious football question. Who wins the game and why?
I will take Mahomes, Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, Steve Spagnuolo, Snead, and company. I just question Whit, and I'm not rooting against Shanahan. And we see all the Shanahan disciples that have gone on to be offensive coordinators and head coaches or quarterback coaches, etc. As you and I talk right now, the last 8 years in the NFL, Kyle Shanahan has run an offense for a team in the Final Four times. He still hasn't won it all. As Billy Beane, as Brad Pitt as Billy Beane talked about in Moneyball. Yeah, still trying to win the last game of the season. Shanahan, offensive coordinator for Atlanta in the collapse in Super Bowl 51. Head coach of the Niners against the Chiefs in this spot, Super Bowl 54. 10-point lead, 6 minutes to go. Chiefs scored the last 21. Shanahan, offensive coordinator. Shanahan in the Final Four last year. Granted, Brock Purdy got hurt. He didn't have another quarterback. I don't know that the Niners play with as much emotion as the Chiefs do. They strike me as it's more of an Atlanta Braves approach. And granted, the Braves won World Series when they had all those starting pitchers, not talking about the modern Braves title. I just wonder, and Whit, is it me? But when you think about Super Bowl 51 and the Falcons not finishing the job, and Super Bowl 54 and the Niners not finishing the job, and you think about the recent game against the Lions where the Niners started so slowly. I want Shanahan to show me he can do it for 60 minutes. Did it in a lot of regular season games this year, not in the Baltimore game, but did it in a lot of regular season games. Do it in a big game. Do it in a conference championship game, do it in a Super Bowl, because I know Andy Reid can do it. I know Patrick Mahomes can do it. And that's tough to take those guys down. And I know from the way back to betting, there's a lot of liability in Vegas on 49er futures. People from California most of the year were betting the Niners to win it all. So the fact that the line is moving towards 2, 2.5, maybe even 3 by kickoff on the Niners, while there are a lot of people betting on the Chiefs, I think Vegas actually needs the Chiefs to win this game. So all those future bets from those people from California who've been betting all year on the Niners, because Chiefs fans weren't betting all year on the Chiefs. We keep hearing about that Christmas Day disaster against the Raiders. The Chiefs had really a bad second half to the season. So you always pay attention to the line, but you also pay attention to what Vegas needs opposite their liability. And they have more liability on the Niners, believe it or not, than they have on the Chiefs. So just based on history, I'll go with the Chiefs in this one and see if Shanahan can finally produce a 60-minute big game.
In just a few seconds, we'll have some closing thoughts on this episode, so stay tuned. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider subscribing or sharing and leave a review. Let me know what you'd like to hear in the future on Media Credentials. I couldn't think of a nightmare travel story to meet Todd's challenge, but here's the most recent weird travel story. On a Sunday night last fall, I had to get from St. Augustine, Florida, where I was working on PGA Tour Live, to Stamford, Connecticut to work for Golf Channel. I traded shifts with another PGA Tour Live announcer to get out a little early on Sunday to drive 45 miles to the Jacksonville airport, where I was supposed to connect through Atlanta to JFK. Bad weather in Atlanta delayed and eventually canceled the flight out of Jacksonville, and there was no way to get anywhere else that night. The only option was to drive 2 hours back to Orlando, stay at the Hyatt inside the airport, and take the first flight out on Monday morning, which was at 6:30 a.m. I slept for about 2 hours. Luckily, Golf Channel has an excellent and understanding travel agency. Anyway, thanks to Todd for a fun chat. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the big game. Thanks again for listening to Media Credentials. For examples of my work, including video and audio clips, a blog, and my contact page, check out whitwatson.com.